Good evening. Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome. My name is Ngoni Munemo. I'm the Dean of Faculty and Vice President for Academic Affairs. Let me begin by recognizing our collective responsibility to acknowledge our colonial history. Our campus is located on the ancestral and traditional lands of the Oneida Nation. We express gratitude for the relationship between Chief Shenandoah and Samuel Kirkland, who founded the Hamilton Oneida Academy, which later became Hamilton College. Today, the college community commits itself to engaging in solidarity with the Oneida Nation and to ensuring that the perspectives and cultures of Indigenous peoples are honored and embraced. As new dean, I'm learning that I have many ceremonial roles to play around campus, some of which leave me a little bemused, but not so with being here with you this evening. What better way to spend my time than to be involved with one of their signature intellectual engagements that we have. So I'm truly honored to be here this evening to kick off the Tolles Lecture. The Winston Tolles Lecture Series was established in 1991 by members of the class of 1951 in memory of Wynton Tolles, class of 1928 and former dean of the college from 1947 to 1972. I don't think a dean after that ever lasted that long, so I can only hope to last a fraction of that time. The fund provides support to bring to campus distinguished writers in the fields of literature, journalism, and theater to lecture and meet with students. I welcome you all to this lecture and encourage you to join us for a post-lecture reception in the Bristol Center Hub right across the street. And rumor has it there might even be some book signing that will occur at the Bristol Center. While I'm up here, I also want to offer thanks to Lisa Magnarelli and the others in the college events office, audiovisual services staff for their organizational work in support of this lecture. It is now my pleasure to call upon Naomi Gutman, Jane D. and Ellis E. Bradford, class of 45 distinguished writing chair and professor of literature and creative writing, to introduce our distinguished guests. Again, welcome.
Thank you, Dean Munemo, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm very honored to introduce Ruth Ozeki to you tonight. And firstly, well, we've already made some thanks. I was going to make thanks as well, so can't thank too many people too many times. The Dean of Faculty and Wynton J. Tolles Lecture Fund for their support. Thanks to Lisa Magnarelli, who works tirelessly behind the scenes to make these things happen, and other people in the staff, and to our staff in the department office, including Jen Lulai, who created the poster. And to my colleagues and the students who attended the Ruth Ozeki, the extracurricular Ruth Ozeki Book Club in advance of this exciting event, and a special thanks to Kyoko Amori and Emi Tasho, who made this wonderful, had the poster project, and then they made this wonderful handout pamphlet with different people's responses to different quotes from Ruth Ozeki's books. So Ruth, and she's asked us all to call her Ruth, will read for 45 minutes, which will be followed by about a 15-minute Q&A, and I hope you have your questions ready. Then we'll cross Campus Road and have the book signing and books for sale at the hub. Ruth Ozeki visits us from Smith College, where she is the Grace Jarcho Ross 1933 Professor of Humanities in the Department of English Language and Literature. She is the author of 4 highly acclaimed and award-winning novels, including most recently The Book of Form and Emptiness, which just this summer received the International Women's Prize for Fiction. A very big deal. In addition, Ruth is a writer and a teacher. In addition to being a writer and teacher, Ruth is an ordained Zen Buddhist priest affiliated with the Brooklyn Zen Center and the Everyday Zen Foundation. One amazing thing about Ruth's work overall is that she engages with a world that includes so many of its daily horrors and yet manages to keep us reading. And not only reading, but feeling. And though many of the stories she relates are hard, we manage not only to not to turn away, but to feel, and I think, to feel moved, and at least, I think, partly purified and uplifted. Whether her topic is natural disasters, climate change, environmental degradation, the corruption of the meat industry, problems with genetically modified food technology, bullying, mental illness, grief, or suicide, Ruth manages to pull us along with her characters as they struggle through the woes of the Anthropocene epoch. Without lecturing us, Ozeki's characters remind us of things we probably already know. If only we would accept the world as it is, ourselves as we are, we might be able to affect change. How does she do this? Through language, a love of language and play that keeps readers engaged and listening, hearing the characters as they sort through problems they face in a world that looks very much like ours, all at once, complex, conflicted, fantastic, disastrous, and beautiful. Above all, I think through language and the connection she makes between words and worlds, she convinces us that we live in a world worth saving. I will end with words from a poem by Ruth Ozeki. The poem is titled Thoughts on Language, and the last stanza goes like this. What is this if not ritual? Objects inherited significantly placed, sounds untenable, long breaths the ancestors spoke against their deaths and yours and mine. Breathe in time and exhale praises, or in silence, the holy mystery at the core of all this, so that when I offer you something, this stone, for example, you cup your hand to receive a cool, smooth weight. Let us not wait any longer to receive the delightful weight of Ruth's words. Please welcome Ruth Ozeki.
Wow, thank you so much. Did I write that? Sometimes this happens, you write things, and I kind of have a vague memory of writing that. But it was almost like, it was, wasn't it? It was someone else who wrote it, because that person is not this person who's standing here right now, right? And we're all time beings, right? And we inhabit our time periods, and then we move on. Thank you so much, Dean Munemo, for that introduction, and for Professor Naomi. Naomi, thank you. I tend to go by first names, mainly because I only started teaching about 7 years ago at university, and people were calling me professor, right? And I kept looking behind, expecting to see a professor, behind me somewhere. And then it took me a while to realize that it was me. So I really don't identify as a professor. I identify as a writer. And I don't really identify my students as students either. I think of them more as young writers, And we're all in this business together of learning how to write better. And I just want to thank the students who came to the workshop today. It was, I see many of your faces here, and we had a good time. So I thought that was really a wonderful way to engage with the college. You guys are lucky to be in such a beautiful place. This seems like an amazing community. So, you know, when we first discussed this event, it was still in the middle of a pandemic, which apparently is over now. And I was not sure whether, you know, I would actually be able to be here, you know, standing in the same room, unmasked with everyone. You know, it's so different. It's so different to be in person. And I just want to take a moment to appreciate the fact that, you know, here we are, and here you are, and you're not enclosed in tiny little boxes, you know, although I can kind of see you in little boxes, right? But no, you're here, fully embodied people, and it's a wonderful thing. So I'm really grateful for that, and I'm grateful to be here. Today, what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about my new novel, The Book of Form and Emptiness, and then to read a little bit from it as well, so that you can hear it the way I hear it. And then I'd like to open it up for more of a conversation, you know, and back and forth with you guys. So that's kind of my plan. It's nice to be invited to do a talk like this because it gives me the occasion to look back over my work, which I don't do that often, you know, and to look back over my work and to see it from a kind of wider perspective. When I'm in the middle of writing a novel, I am so buried, so deep inside the thing that I never sort of look up over the edge of it. But now, you know, I can kind of look back and think, you know, of the work as a whole. And one of the things that I realized is that I think I write novels in pairs. And this was something that was this was kind of new information to me, right? But the first two novels that I wrote, My Year of Meats and All Over Creation, were both about food, right? They were about food, and they were about media. They were about the way that food is sold, right? Sold to us. And they were also very much about the way that food is marketed as being real, being authentic. And so one of the questions that comes up a lot in these books is, what is real? What is authentic? My Year of Meats is about the meat industry. All Over Creation is about the potato industry and about genetically modified foods. And so, of course, this question about, you know, is this real food has come up a lot in this conversation. Both of the, you know, as I said, both of the books are about food and the way food is marketed, and also about the environmental impacts of the food industries. And All Over Creation kind of grew out of questions that I had been asking when I was writing My Year of Meats. These last two books, the Book of A Tale for the Time Being and the Book of Form and Emptiness, form another pair. And I kind of think of them as being siblings in a way. Both books are about young people who are struggling with various mental health issues. Both books are inspired by Buddhist philosophy, in particular Zen philosophy. And both books actually have Zen nuns as characters in them. I don't think there are many Zen nuns in books written in English. Probably not that many in Japan either, now that I think about it. Both books are about reading and writing and the power of storytelling, okay? Which, again, refers back to the first two books, which are also about advertising, right? Which is a form of storytelling. So I seem to be kind of preoccupied with how stories are told. The books are about the ways that we represent and understand reality, you know, what is real and how do we know? And both books, again, have concerns and questions about the environment. And the Book of Form and Emptiness grew out of A Tale for the Time Being. And we can talk more about that later if anybody, I'm seeding a question here, but we can talk more about that later if anybody's interested. And it's like the pairs of books are in conversation with each other. okay? And I finish one, and I'm still interested in the themes and questions that arose during the writing of it, and so I feel the need to write a second one. And so this was interesting to kind of to think about. One of the things that I'm often, I find myself talking about, and I'm often asked about, is where the idea of these books come from, and I never quite know how to answer, because it's never just one thing. It's more like a constellation of fairly random factors that collide and come together. So it could be, for example, books that I've read, or a conversation I overhear at a coffee shop, or an article in the newspaper about climate change, or a link to a website about crow intelligence. Sometimes it's a big existential question, something that's been bothering me, like the nature of reality, or the impact of capitalism on mental health. Often though, and we talked about this today, it's about something that I regret, something that has happened in my life that I feel some kind of remorse about. And I really believe that remorse is good for writers. It's a very unpleasant feeling, but it's a very rich seed for stories. So these are the kinds of random elements that come together, they constellate, and from this constellation, the novel starts to speak. Okay. And I say speak here quite intentionally, because novels very often come to me as voices. And this can be either the voice of a character, or it can be the voice of the book itself. Okay, the voice of the tone of the book. And somewhere back in April of 2012, okay, so that's 10 years ago. Think back, young people. Think back to what you were doing 10 years ago. And now you have a sense of how long it took me to write this book. Okay. I heard this voice in my head, and the voice said, a book must start somewhere. Okay. Well, that's kind of obvious, right? I think I was really anxious because I wanted to be writing, and I wasn't sure what I was going to be writing, and I think I just jotted that down in my process journal. But there was something about the weight of this sentence that appealed to me, and the tone, the serious tone of this voice, that made me kind of pay attention, right? I paid attention to it, and I wrote it down. And here's a tip, okay, for the young writers in the room. When a character or a book deigns to speak to you, okay, you must immediately stop whatever it is that you're doing, sit down and write it down, okay? If you don't do this, then the character or the book will go find another writer who is paying attention and not, checking their Snapchat or playing Candy Crush on their phone. So this is important, right? Pay attention. When that voice comes to you, pay attention. Because I'm a professional writer, I make a point of sitting at my desk every day. Even if I'm not doing anything, I'm still sitting at my desk every day. A lot of the time, really nothing happens, but I, sit there and I surf the web and I disappear down internet rabbit holes. But if and when a voice comes or an idea comes, right, I'm ready. I'm ready to write it down. And so when I heard this voice, I wrote down that sentence, a book must start somewhere. And because I was sitting at my desk and paying attention, the voice continued to talk to me. And this was really the beginning of the Book of Form and Emptiness. And what I'd like to do now is read the first couple of pages to you so that you can hear the voices as I heard them, okay? I didn't do the recording for the audiobook of the Book of Form and Emptiness, and the audio recording is not the way I hear the book. So it's important to me for you to hear the book the way I heard it. I'm going to correct that, by the way. I'm going to re-record it. Okay. So one of the things that you'll get a sense of, I hope, in this reading that I'm going to do, is that the novel emerges as a dialogue between the book, right, who's okay, and this is where it gets a little complicated, the book, who is the narrator of the book, and the book's protagonist, whose name is Benny. Okay, and I know this is confusing, but we'll come back and talk about that later. So I hope this is okay if I read a little bit. You guys into this? Okay, it's good. I love reading out loud. It makes me really happy. There's something about it that it kind of turns all of you into small children. And so get cozy, just relax, get cozy, curl up. Okay, here we go. In the beginning, a book must start somewhere. One brave letter must volunteer to go first, laying itself on the line in an act of faith from which a word takes heart and follows, drawing a sentence into its wake. From there, a paragraph amasses, and soon a page, and the book is on its way, finding a voice, calling itself into being. A book must start somewhere, and this one starts here. A boy. Shh, listen. That's my book, and it's talking to you. Can you hear it? It's okay if you can't, though. It's not your fault. Things speak all the time, but if your ears aren't attuned, you have to learn to listen. You can start by using your eyes because eyes are easy. Look at all the things around you. What do you see? A book, obviously, and obviously the book is speaking to you, so try something more challenging. The chair you're sitting on? The pencil in your pocket? The sneaker on your foot? Still can't hear? Then get down on your knees and put your head to the seat, or take off your shoe and hold it to your ear. No, wait, if there are people around, they'll think you're mad, so try it with the pencil first. Pencils have stories inside them, and they're safe as long as you don't stick the point in your ear. Just hold it next to your head and listen. Can you hear the wood whisper, the ghost of the pine, the mutter of lead? Sometimes it's more than one voice. Sometimes it's a whole chorus of voices rising from a single thing, especially if it's a made thing with lots of different makers. But don't be scared. I think it depends on the kind of day they were having back in Guangdong or Laos or wherever. And if it was a good day at the old sweatshop, if they were enjoying a pleasant thought at the moment when that particular grommet came tumbling down the line and passed through their fingers, then that pleasant thought will cling to the whole. Sometimes it's not so much a thought as a feeling, a nice warm feeling, like love, for example, sunny and yellow. But when it's a sad feeling or an angry one that gets laced into your shoe, then you better watch out because that shoe might do crazy shit, like marching your feet right up to the front of the Nike store, for example, where you could wind up smashing the display window with a baseball bat made of furious wood. If that happens, it's still not your fault. Just apologize to the window. Say, I'm sorry to the glass. And whatever you do, don't try to explain. The arresting officer doesn't care about the crappy conditions in the bat factory. He won't care about the chainsaws or the sturdy ash tree that the bat used to be. So just keep your mouth shut. Stay calm. Be polite. Remember to breathe. It's really important not to get upset because then the voices will get the upper hand and take over your mind. Things are needy. They take up space. They want attention, and they'll drive you mad if you let them. So just remember, you're like the air traffic controller. No, wait, you're like the leader of a big brass band made up of all the jazzy stuff of the planet, and you're floating out there in space, standing on this great garbage heap of a world, with your hair slicked back and your natty suit and your stick up in the air, surrounded by all the eager things. And for one quick, beautiful moment, all their voices go silent, waiting till you bring your baton down. Music or madness, it's totally up to you. The book. So, start with the voices then. When did he first hear them? when he was still little? Benny was always a small boy and slow to develop, as though his cells were reluctant to multiply and take up space in the world. It seemed he pretty much stopped growing when he turned 12, the same year his father died and his mother started putting on weight. The change was subtle, but Benny seemed to shrink as Annabelle grew, as if she were metabolizing her small son's grief along with her own. Yes, that seems right. So perhaps the voices started around then too, shortly after Kenny died? It was a car accident that killed him. No, it was a truck. Kenny O was a jazz clarinetist, but his real name was Kenji, so we'll call him that. He played swing mostly, big band stuff at weddings and bar mitzvahs, and in campy downtown hipster clubs where the dudes all wore beards and pork pie hats and checkered shirts and mothy tweed jackets from the Salvation Army. He'd been playing a gig, and afterwards he went out drinking or drugging or whatever he did with his musician friends. Just a little toot, but enough so that on his way home, when he stumbled and fell in the alley, he didn't see the necessity of getting up right away. He wasn't far from home, only a few yards from the rickety gate that led to the back of his house. If he'd managed to crawl a bit further, he would have been okay. But instead, he just lay there on his back in a dim pool of light cast by the street lamp above the Union Gospel Mission thrift shop dumpster. The long chill of winter had begun to lift, and a spring mist hung in the alleyway. He lay there, gazing up at the light and the tiny particles of moisture that swarmed brightly in the air. He was drunk, or high, or both. The light was beautiful. Earlier in the evening, he'd had a fight with his wife. Maybe he was feeling sorry. Maybe, in his mind, he was vowing to do better. Who knows what he was doing? Maybe he fell asleep. Let's hope so. In any case, that's where he was still lying an hour or so later when the delivery truck came rattling down the alleyway. Okay, I'm going to stop the reading there. Thank you. Thanks. I'm going to stop there because those of you who've read the book know what happens next. And for those of you who haven't read the book, I'll just tell you. Kenji dies, right? This is not a spoiler. If I'd read another paragraph, I mean, you already know this, right? Kenji is run over by the truck, and this tragic and really stupid accident is the event that sets the story in motion. In screenwriting, it's what we call the precipitating incident, okay? So my editor, and I love my editor, was concerned about this. She was like, maybe not such a great idea to start a book with the death of a beloved character. And I saw her point, you know, for commercial reasons, it's kind of a, it's kind of a bummer. But I really felt that, for this book, that death was absolutely necessary. The book tells the story about Benny and his mother Annabelle, who are grieving this terrible loss and trying to put their lives back together again. Benny is a sensitive kid. He's 12 when his father dies, when Kenji dies, and they were very, very close. And Benny, after the accident, is traumatized, and he starts to hear voices. The first voice he hears is his dad's voice. They're at the crematorium. This is after this big funeral, which is kind of a New Orleans-style funeral where all of the jazz musicians carry Kenji's coffin down the street, and they bring it to the crematorium. And there, in the crematorium, Benny hears his dad calling his name. Okay, so this might seem strange, right? But it's actually not uncommon to hear the voice of a dead person, especially if it's someone you loved. The same thing happened to me after my dad died. I'd be doing something, completely ordinary, like washing the dishes or folding, the laundry, and I would hear him kind of behind me. It was always right here, on the right-hand side. And I'd hear him clear his throat and say my name, Ruth. And every time this happened, I'd turn around like that, completely expecting to see him, and he wouldn't be there, right? And then it would hit me once again, oh, right, he's dead. And every time this happened, it was like getting punched in the stomach all over again, because I really loved my dad, and I missed him terribly. And so this was, it just felt like I was reliving that grief all over again. And it happened it went on for about a year. It happened maybe 5 or 6 times in different situations. And then eventually it stopped, right? And I pretty much forgot about it at that point. And it's interesting too, because in the time since this book has been published, I hear so many stories from people who've lost loved ones and have this sensation of hearing their loved ones speak to them. So in any case, this was an experience that I gave to Benny. Right, I gave to Benny in the book, and this is once again what we were talking about in class today, giving personal experiences, right, to the characters in your book. And so I gave this experience to Benny, but in Benny's case, the phenomenon, he stopped hearing his dad's voice, but he started to hear instead the voices of objects, the voices of things in the house talking to him. These were just ordinary objects like a Christmas ornament or a running shoe or, a piece of wilted lettuce in the refrigerator. And he doesn't understand exactly what these things are saying to him, but he has a sense of their feeling tone, And this is, of course, very, very disturbing to him. His mom, by this time, Annabelle, is working as a media monitor, right? And her office was closed, and she's been sent home to work. And so she spends her days clipping newspaper articles and listening to radio and television and making dubs of things for clients. Okay, and this is, something that we all experienced during the pandemic too, being sent to work from home. And like many of us, Annabelle, her home office started to just grow out of control. And she started, the clutter started to build in the house. And in addition to that too, she started doing retail therapy. I mean, she was grieving and trying to come to terms, trying to soothe herself. And so the house that they're living on has gotten increasingly cluttered, and it's chaotic, and it's filled with things that won't shut up. And at first, Benny, tries to ignore this. He tries to ignore all of the voices around him, but little by little, as his mom's stuff accumulates, the voices grow more disruptive. And then, indeed, they follow him out of the house, and they follow him to school, and then they start to cause trouble. Benny's sent to see a psychiatrist who diagnoses him and prescribes medication, but the voices just become more obstreperous, and eventually he winds up on a pediatric psych ward. Okay, when he's finally discharged, he decides that school is no longer an option, and he starts cutting classes and takes refuge in the large public library. Okay, and so the library is really where Benny it's where most of the book takes place. And as we know, libraries are, they're filled with speaking objects, right? Books speak to us, literally. Books speak to us. But of course, in the library, they know to speak to us quietly in their library voices. Right? And so Benny finds the library to be a very soothing place. And of course, too, as we all know, libraries are really magical places, right? And in this library, all sorts of wild things start to happen. Benny meets a homeless Slovenian poet-philosopher named Slavoj, the Bottle Man, who holds literary salons in the men's washroom. He falls in love with a beautiful young conceptual artist with a transgender ferret who makes installations throughout the library's collections. He meets a children's librarian who's a, total superhero because librarians are superheroes. And he discovers an abandoned bindery in the basement of the library, which is a very powerful and mystical place where all phenomena exists in an unbound state. And it's here in the bindery that he meets a very special talking object. It's his very own book, who starts to narrate his life. And the book, over the course, of the story, the book helps Benny in various ways navigate the terrain of his grief and helps him, too, find his own voice and to listen to the things that truly matter. So the narrator of the Book of Form and Emptiness is the Book of Form and Emptiness, kind of telling itself into being and telling Benny into being as well, right? Or is it the other way around? Is Benny the author of his life? And so does that mean that he's the author of the book too, right? So that's one of the questions, right? It's like the chicken or the egg, which comes first, the book or the boy? In any case, little by little, Benny's story emerges. And from time to time, Benny interrupts the book's narration in order to make some kind of correction or to object to what the book is saying. So, for example, when the book leaves out something important, right, Benny interrupts, like he did here, and says, wait, you skipped a good part, right? You need to go back and tell them about that, tell them about that. Or when the book starts, talking about things that he doesn't like, when the book starts telling too much about his parents' sex life, for example, Benny's like, no, stop, wait, they don't need to hear that. That's too much information, right? So there's this dialogue that grows up between Benny and the book. And this, to me, was, this was a very interesting idea because I think that in some way, the dialogue that they're having and this idea of a book as a talking object somehow confirms Benny's basic sanity. Because by this point, he's been diagnosed with various mental illnesses, right? But the book kind of confirms Benny's basic sanity by making all of us complicit, right? Because if we're reading the book, as long as we are reading the book, we are also hearing an object speak, right? The object is speaking to us. And so it turns us all into voice hearers, right? And so, while most of the people in Benny's life, his classmates and his teacher and his psychiatrist, think that because he hears the voices of objects speaking, that he's crazy, the question that I think the book raises is he? And if he is, maybe we all are, okay? And this is, I think, the question really that's at the heart of the book, and it's the one that inspired me to write it. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about in class today, but like Benny, when I was a teenager, I had all sorts of emotional and mental health challenges when I was his age, when I was in high school. And like Benny, I was also medicated and hospitalized and ended up on a psych ward. I was older than him, but it was the same basic thing. I've struggled with anxiety and depression all my life, as many artists and writers and musicians do. And the thing that has saved me is books, right? The thing that has saved me first was reading books and then later writing them, okay? And so, in the Book of Form and Emptiness, what I was thinking about, I really wanted to explore the distinction that we make between what we call creativity and what we call madness. Right? And I wanted to think about how we as a society understand or fail to understand these unshared and often perplexing mental states. I told you about hearing my dad's voice after he died, and after, I stopped hearing it, I pretty much forgot about it. And I didn't really remember it until years later when I was doing an event sponsored by a public library in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it was after the publication of my last book, A Tale for the Time Being. And I was talking again about how novels come to me as voices, and a man in the audience raised his hand and asked me what I meant by that. Did I really, hear the voices of my characters as if with my ears, as if they were outside my head, or was I speaking more metaphorically? And I could tell by the way he was asking this question that it wasn't a casual question, that he really wanted to know the answer to this. And it turned out that, in fact, his son was a voice hearer, okay? And that his son heard voices that were very, very disturbing and disruptive, both to the boy as well as to his father. And the father was, trying to help him, watching him suffer. And so the father wanted to know if I was a voice hearer like that too. And if so, how did I cope with it? Were my voices as disturbing to me as his sons were to him? And so we had this long conversation about it. And I told him that I, that's when I remembered, oh, right, I know what it feels like to hear a voice that no one else can hear, and to hear it as if with my ears, as if it's outside. All right. But I explained to him that in writing, my voices are more internal. It's like I hear them with my mind, right? I still hear them, but they're inside. So this really got me thinking about the way that, there are so many different kinds of voices that we experience. On one side, there are the voices that we think of as inspiration, right? The artistic inspiration, the voice of the muse, right? The internal music that musicians hear, the visions that painters see, the voices of characters in books. And we're lucky because our culture has decided that this kind of voice hearing is acceptable, right? And in fact, it even celebrates it. And that's in fact why I'm here today. So I feel very lucky about this, because I can easily imagine a society where this is not the case, right? Where artists and writers are persecuted for their visions and for making things up, and for lying and writing things that aren't true. And in this society, I probably would be put in prison or, locked up on a psych ward for telling stories that aren't true. And you would probably be in trouble too for reading them. Thankfully, we're not there yet. Okay, and I'm thinking about the book banning here, and am getting more and more concerned about the direction that we're heading. But in any case, that's one end of this voice hearing spectrum. These artistic voices, these creative voices, and then in the middle there are these other kinds of voices that I'm sure you're all familiar with. These horrible, neurotic, self-critical voices that I think we all hear to some extent, and that certainly afflict artists and writers. And they're the ones that are telling us that whatever it is that we're writing sucks, and that nobody's going to be interested in reading it, and you should, probably just give up and get a real job. And I hear these voices all the time, right? I struggle with them. I've heard them for years. Over the years, I've learned to grapple with them. I've learned how to work with them, but it's been a struggle. And then there are the voices on the far end of the spectrum that, if you tell your psychiatrist about them, you'll probably end up, on a locked ward on lithium. And so there's, and these are voices that are, that are very disturbing to the people who hear them, right? And it's, and I don't mean to diminish this, because I have a lot of friends who are voice hearers, and these are very disturbing. So there's this spectrum of voices that are within our human experience. And it occurred to me as I was writing this book very much that, we have this idea of, what's normal in our culture. And our bandwidth for normal, I think, in our culture is very, very narrow, right? But in fact, the number of people who are hearing voices and who are not, not disturbed by them is much larger than we think. So it's not an automatic, symptom of psychosis or schizophrenia, as it's very often determined to be. So one of the questions that I was asking myself as I was writing this book is there a way to expand and make our category of normal, right, a little bit more wide and all-inclusive, and generous. So this is something else that was sort of around, going on in my head as I was writing this. So the last thing I just want to mention here is our relationship with things, okay? The book very much asks this question about our relationship with things. Benny and Annabelle are both enthralled by objects, by things, and by the stories that objects seem to want to tell. Benny hears these voices of things speaking to him, and the voices he hears are not often happy, or not always happy ones. For Annabelle, things are also profoundly meaningful. She collects things and hoards them because of the stories they contain. And she can't bear to get rid of her dead husband's clothing, because they are filled with his spirit. And this was something else that, again, came from a personal experience of mine. My parents never threw anything away. They weren't hoarders, but they were born in 1914, and they lived through the Great Depression. And they saved every piece of tinfoil, every piece of plastic wrap. They carefully washed it, folded it, and saved it for reuse, right? They were very neat, they were very tidy, but they saved everything. And when they died, the task of cleaning all of this up, clearing all of this out, fell to me. I'm an only child. And this was an enormous undertaking. Both my parents were scholars. They were very serious readers, and so there were shelves and shelves and shelves of books. My mother saved all my report cards and homework going back to pre-kindergarten, okay? And I found some of these. Ruthie is a very helpful little girl. She likes to help the teacher pass out the cookies at snack time. But she must learn to share this fun job with the other children. It just makes me cringe. I must have been such an obsequious little sycophant, back then. It's so embarrassing. My dad was an anthropologist, and he worked a lot with the Oneida people, and a lot of Indigenous and First Nations communities throughout the U.S. And he received many gifts from the communities he worked with. And so I would find these beautiful things, these woven baskets and ceramic bowls and masks and carvings packed away in boxes, and I had no idea where they were from or what to do with them, right? My Japanese mother had inherited all of her parents' belongings, and so there were scrolls and dolls and woodblock prints and pottery and prayer beads, thousands of photographs, literally, that my grandfather had taken. He was the first official photographer for Volcano National Park on the Big Island of Hawaii. And I grew up with all of these things, and I remember how special they seemed. There was this one box in particular that I treasured. It was filled with these beautiful slices of polished stone, agate and malachite and geodes, and they were mounted on small pieces of cardboard. And my mother told me that my grandfather had cut them and polished them when I was little, and I played with them all the time, and I thought they were the most incredibly precious and valuable things. And I remember I felt very rich because I had these valuable stones. And it was much later, when I was older, that my mother told me the rest of the story there. My grandfather had indeed collected these stones. He had collected them in the desert in Santa Fe, New Mexico, when he was imprisoned in a Justice Department prisoner of war camp in Santa Fe during World War II. And I think they must have had some kind of lapidary workshop or factory at the camp, because the prisoners were made to work. And the prisoners were cutting and polishing these stones that were then sold to tourists, right? And so the stones in my box were the ones that my grandfather had brought back with him after he was released after the war. And so this was a story of objects that I knew, right? And the story made the objects even more valuable to me. But the rest of the house was filled with things, whose stories I had no idea of. And I just remember thinking, if only these things could speak. If only these things could speak. But of course, they couldn't. And, if they could speak, I didn't know how to listen to them. There was this one little box. There was this one little box that I found in my mother's study. Okay, and I should mention that my mother had Alzheimer's. Okay, and it was small. It was about this size. And my mom had very carefully labeled the box on the outside with a Sharpie marker, and she'd labeled it both in English and in Japanese, right? And in English, horizontally, she had written empty box, okay? And in Japanese, vertically, she had written karabako, which means empty box, okay? In other words, she wanted to make absolutely sure that there was no mistake that this was an empty box, okay? And so this was like the last straw. I'd been cleaning and sorting and discarding stuff from the house for weeks and filling dumpsters. And I just remember sitting on the floor in the midst of all of this mess and staring at this box and thinking, like, seriously, Mom? What am I supposed to do with this? Because I couldn't bear to throw it away because it was so typically Mom, But I couldn't put anything in it either because that would turn it into precisely what it wasn't, right? It was an empty box. It had to stay that way, right? It was perfectly useless. So in any case, I ended up taking it home and putting it on my Zen altar, where it still continues to sit today, still empty. This brings me back to the final point that I want to make, which is about the title, The Book of Form and Emptiness, and where that comes from. If we think about things, objects in the world as being form, which they are, right? They all have things, they all have forms, right? So then what is the opposite of form, right? What is emptiness? And this phrase, form and emptiness, comes from a central Mahayana Buddhist scripture called the Heart Sutra, or the Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra, the Mahaprajna Paramita Sutta. And it's a key teaching in Buddhism. And the line goes, form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. Form itself is emptiness. Emptiness itself, form. Okay, so this is a kind of enigmatic, assertion. And the way that I like to think about it is really to think of it metaphorically, right? To think of emptiness as this vast, vast, vast ocean, okay? And so kind of picture this vast ocean that's so big that you can't see the shoreline, right? You can't see anything but water, right? And then in this ocean, right, the planet the planet turns, right, and the winds blow, and the moon waxes or wanes, and from this ocean, a little wave, right, starts to form, right, and the wave starts to poke its head up, right, and it looks around, and all it sees around it is this vast ocean of emptiness, right, and the ocean is like, the wave is like, wow, look at me, I'm really something. Right? I'm substantial. I'm really something. He's got a little white hat on, and I'm bigger than all of this and anything around me. I'm taller than anything around me. This is fantastic. This is great. I love being a wave, right? I love being something. And then, of course, what happens, right? The planet turns and the winds die down and the moon wanes and the little wave, starts to go down, right? And the wave is like, oh, shit, until it goes back into, this great ocean of emptiness again, right? And so the teaching here at the heart of this is this teaching of impermanence, right? And it goes back to the beginning of the book, starting the book with death, with this moment when form becomes formless, right? When form turns into emptiness. And so it's about the teaching is about impermanence. The teaching is also about the teaching of no self, that there is no abiding self. The wave will not last forever, right? And neither will we. We know this. It's easy to forget, but we do know it, right? And then the final teaching in this sutra is the teaching of interdependence, interbeing, right? And in other words, the wave can't exist without that ocean, and the ocean can't exist without waves, right? And so it's this, the radical interdependence between the world of form and the world of emptiness, and the radical interdependence between you and me. Okay, all of us. And this goes to the heart of my feeling about writing and about books. Books are fascinating. Books are magic. We have this thing here. It's got a form, right? And we think of it as an object, as a thing. This is a thing, the Book of Form and Emptiness, right? But it's also not a thing. The Book of Form and Emptiness is a relationship. Right. And I do my part of it, right? I write this Book of Form and Emptiness, or any book, and I send it out into the world, right? And you read it, and together we then and you bring your lived experience to the book, right? And so together we then co-create a Book of Form and Emptiness, which is completely different from the Book of Form and Emptiness that we create, right? Two completely different books of form and emptiness, but they're still called the same thing, right? And so that to me is both magical and fascinating. And it seems to me that this is a real expression of the interdependence that's at the heart of any creative act. Right, that we end up being collaborators in this, and this is something I think too that this theme of interdependence and collaboration is again something that is at the heart of the Book of Form and Emptiness as well. So those are my comments about the book. I know I told you a lot about it, but believe it or not, I don't think that anything I told you is a spoiler. So there. And if anybody has any questions about, or the stuff you want to talk about, either about this book or about, the previous books, or about life, or about, what else, anything that I happen to know about, that's fine. I used to, thank goodness in my introduction, you didn't talk about the low-budget horror films that I used to direct. Yeah. So, yeah. If anybody has any questions, please speak up. Thanks.
If I understood the time frame, you said 10 years ago you started writing this book, and then 3 years later you started, a professorship at Smith College.
Something like that. That's right. Yeah.
So you had these overlapping professions. How did one impact, did you find your writing reinforcing your teaching or detracting from it? Or did you find your teaching reinforcing or detracting from your writing?
Yeah. Did everybody hear this? It's about the relationship. I started writing this book in 2012, started teaching in 2015. I have another profession, which is as a Zen Buddhist priest, so we could throw that in the mix as well. I certainly think the teaching slowed me down. It slowed down. I had fewer hours, and so that was too bad. But on the other hand, what I got from the teaching was so profound. Teaching. I love teaching, and what I love about it is Well, first of all, it's just exciting to be around. It's just exciting to be around young people. It is, and but teaching creative writing in particular forces me to really think about what it is that I'm doing, because a lot of the stuff that I do automatically. I don't really, I don't pay attention to it. But when I'm teaching, I start to really pay attention to the tools that are in my toolbox, and in a way start to, to sharpen them and to use them in a more conscientious and deliberate way. And so I think in that sense, the teaching really helped my writing, especially because I was writing about a young person again, and so there was just a kind of freshness that I felt from my students that maybe, enlivened the world of the book. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay, good. You want to run around and yeah. Okay. Get exercise here. Good. Oh.
I can just yell. Okay. When and how did you know you wanted to be a professional writer?
When and how did I know I want to be a professional writer? I can repeat questions. It's okay. I wanted to be a writer ever since I first started reading when I was very, very little. That was always really clear to me. I went through phases where I thought I could be a professional flautist or a ballet dancer or whatever. I still kind of want to be a rock climber. That's a profession that I would really love to do, but it's too late now. The thing was, though, that at the time, this was when I was growing up, there weren't any Asian-looking people writing fiction, in English, right? Not that I knew of, anyway. And so I just didn't, and I wanted to write novels. I knew that I wanted to write long stories, long form. I loved dropping into novels, right? And so it was a problem because I just didn't have any role models, and I just didn't know really whether it was possible to do that or not. The only literary form that I felt any sense of, racial and cultural entitlement to was haiku, right? Like, what? I can't hear anything. I'm deafened. Yeah, that's not use that. That's good. That's good. Yeah. That was really painful. So the only kind of genre that I felt entitled to was haiku, which is like five syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, which is I wanted to be a novelist, right? I wanted to be like writing War and Peace, right? And so it was really Joy Luck Club, I think was a big commercial Asian American novel, but that was published when I was in my 30s already. And so, it took a while for me to really imagine what it would be like to be a this is addressing the professional part of it. I just didn't think it was possible to be a professional writer until quite a bit later. And it was the writers, the Asian American writers in particular, who were starting to publish, that made me realize, like, oh, this is possible. And so as soon as I could, I also wanted to be a filmmaker, and so I started making films. I learned an enormous amount about writing through making films, and so that was a really important part of my training, because I didn't go to MFA school, and I've only taken actually one creative writing class in my life. So for you guys, I was kind of a fraud, when I'm teaching you. But I've taught myself. I've taught myself how to do these things, and I learned a lot about writing through making films. So that's kind of the answer to your question. I wanted to do it from a very young age. It just took me. I didn't publish my first novel until I was 40. Yeah, so. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh my God. The question is what I'm working on next. You know, I wouldn't mind telling you if I were working on something. I'm actually thinking about writing I'm thinking about taking a little break from fiction, and I wrote a little tiny memoir called Time Code of a Face. Yeah, and it was very short, and it didn't take long. It didn't take 9 or 10 years to write. And I would like to do that again. You know, I would like to write something that's very short. And so I'm actually thinking about doing some nonfiction. And I'm not sure exactly what, but probably something having to do with Zen and writing, you know, Zen and creativity. But I'm not sure exactly where that's going to go. And that'll be a little break. And then I do have ideas for books that, you know, that I want to go back to, that I've, you know, ideas that I've had in the past and would love to, you know, to work on. You know, the Book of Form and Emptiness actually came from that. One of the big parts of it was a draft, a discarded draft of an early draft of A Tale for the Time Being. Right. The whole library sequence, the whole, you know, location of the library, Slavosh, the Bottleman, the Aleph, you know, all of these were all characters and locations in an early draft of A Tale for the Time Being. I know it's hard to imagine, but it is. And it was about 300 pages or so. And I, at one point, just took that manuscript. I realized that it wasn't working, and I took that manuscript and unzipped it and just threw out about 300 pages, right? And put it in a file in my computer, and it was a file that I called dump, and there it sat. But the library was such a compelling location, and the characters were, I liked them, you know? And so I kept thinking, you know, is there a way that, you know, that these characters, it's like they refuse to die. And is there a way I can, you know, find a context, find another world for them, find another fictional world for them. And then when I had this idea of a boy who heard the voices of objects speaking to him, then it occurred to me, oh, well, maybe he could hang out in the library. And that's when, you know, that's when the two worlds came together. So very often, I think novels come from collisions. You know, they come from disparate things, disparate ideas colliding and making new worlds. Yeah, so that's, I don't know, I'm hopeful that some of these ideas that, you know, that I've been, you know, trying to work on in the past will come to fruition. It's happened before, so maybe it'll happen again. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for talking to us and visiting. I'm very intrigued by this idea of a book must start somewhere, and I was wondering what you think about the opposite of that, endings, because I often find myself writing and writing and writing and never knowing where to end.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, do you believe that a book must also end somewhere? And if so, how do you decide when to end the book? If not, how do you think you can continue that conversation beyond the confines of a couple hundred pages?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Just a couple things pop to mind. Some authors never end their books. You know, they end, you know, sort of, they end chapters in a story that is then goes out into the world as a book. But they continue to revive those, you know, characters and locations. I mean, Faulkner did that, Elizabeth Strout does that, David Mitchell does that. You know, these locations and characters just keep coming back. I really admire that. I wish I, you know, I just don't seem to be able to think that way. But so that's one answer that pops to mind. Maybe books don't have to end. Maybe books can just kind of sprawl, and sort of grow new limbs. And that would be kind of a cool way to think about it. My feeling is that, I guess for me, I like to end books in a certain way. And I think that if you look at all of my endings, I hope that this is true, okay? That my books tend to have a lot of different plot threads and, lots of different threads, right? And that's how it feels when I'm writing, that I'm sort of casting out these different threads, And so once you have all these threads out there, then at some point you need to start bringing them together and braiding them up, right? And so my feeling, my hope for my books is that I can bring together and resolve the kind of the plot threads, okay, the story threads, but so that there's a sense of resolution at the end, right? Because I've picked up the threads and brought them back in together, and and pulled them together and braided them up, but leaving other things open, leaving other questions open, so that I always want to end my books with an unanswered question of some kind, so that the book, so that the reader will put the book down, but will have to continue to think about it, right? And so that's always been my goal for endings, is to figure out a way of resolving the plot issues, but allowing the bigger kind of, call them whatever you will, philosophical questions. Sometimes it's metafictional questions, letting these bigger issues kind of float beyond the last page of the book. And if I can do that, then I'm happy. But ends are really hard, and I usually when I'm writing, I don't know exactly where I'm going. I have a vague sense of where I'm going, but I don't really know what the last scene is going to be until I get there. And then, at some point so far, I've, written it and realized, oh, that's the end. Yeah. I dread the day when that doesn't happen. What's gonna, can you imagine? Yeah.
Your books tend to focus on very specific people or organizations, like the food industry or like housing soldiers, World War II.
Yeah.
I want to know what your research process is like and how much research might go into each novel.
Yeah. I do a lot of research. Back in the olden days, before the internet, when you actually had to go, physically go to a library, it was clear to me how much research I was doing because I went to the library to do it. Now, research tends to merge with the writing so much. So as I'm writing, I'll come up with a question that I feel needs to be answered, and then before I know it, I'm like down that rabbit hole, researching. And very often the research turns into something else like shopping or something, So it's harder now to really kind of track research in the same way that it used to be. But I do quite a bit, and I do a lot of reading. There are a lot. I mean, my whole bookshelf right now is filled with books about voice hearing. I did a lot of research about that, and I spoke to a lot of people. That's the other thing, is that it's not all library research too. When I was researching voice hearing, I'd had that little bit of experience myself. I have friends who are voice hearers. I, was really interested in the peer support model of support for, people who are distressed. So all of that was a lot of just sitting down and talking to people, So yeah, but that's one of the fun things, because as I said, I don't really know where I'm going when I start, and so questions emerge, during the writing process, and then I just, I research them then, and the research inevitably spawns, new ideas, and sets me off into a different, sends me off into a slightly different direction. So the research, I find, is an integral part of the creative process too. Yeah, and it's fun. Yeah. One more question? Yes. All right, all right. Oh my God. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, sure. I'd been practicing Buddhism for thank you, by the way, for the encouragement about the rock climbing. I was just watching Janja Gombrek climb in Jakarta, and I was just like, oh my God. Anyway, so I'd been interested in meditation since I was a little kid. The first memory I have as a person, when I was, I think, around 3, was I have this image of my grandfather meditating, sitting on the floor and meditating. It was just like, whoa, what's that? So I think I kind of imprinted on it, like really at a young age. And then I just was interested in it. For some reason, I was drawn to it over all these years. In high school, I got initiated into transcendental meditation. I studied the Zen arts when I was in Japan. And it was just interesting to me. And then, and so I always had a kind of, not a very regular meditation practice, but I was always trying, And then in my 30s, I think it was, my parents were quite elderly by then, and it was clear to me. My mom got Alzheimer's. My dad, had a terrible heart condition, and so it was clear to me that the end was coming, and it goes back to also just being an only child and realizing, like, this is like all gonna land on me. I need to figure out how to do this, right? And I wasn't, I just realized I needed help. I needed something that would give me some kind of grounding and enough of a backbone to be able to, get through this and support my parents. And there's many things I could have chosen, alcohol is one of them, right? But that wasn't such a great option. I tried that and it didn't really work. And so, I started sitting with a meditation group, and it really helped me. And so then, and then I started to realize, wow, this is really helping my writing too, and so that was an added kind of, that was like a benefit. And so I got, I kind of got more serious about it. And then I think once my parents died, I just thought, this was so helpful to me. I'd like to pass it on. I'd like to be in a kind of teacher position so that I could pass it on so that others could benefit from it too. And that's why I ended up asking for ordination. And I received ordination in 2010, right? And have been in training. I was in training before that, and continue to be in training now. So I'm taking the long road, simply because I have so many other jobs and hats that I wear. But it's been wonderful. It's been a very, it's been a very, very important part of my life. I mean, I would say in a way, it is my life. So yeah, thanks for your question, and thanks for the encouragement. Great. Thank you all so much. I appreciate this. Thank you. Thank you.